And hello, friends. We welcome you to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the tri-states of West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. On this episode of Chapters, we're talking about short stories and fiction, and West Virginia short stories and fiction, with author Pete Kosky, and his debut, his latest book. His first book is Mountain Tales and River Stories, and Pete Kosky is an award-winning singer and songwriter and storyteller whose voice has been described as crushed velvet with accents of dusty burlap. Though no one in Pete's immediate family was a musician, growing up in West Virginia exposed Pete to traditional music at an early age. He was naturally drawn to music. He became especially fascinated with old songs and ballads. He set out to learn as many of the old songs as he could, and eventually began to write his own songs using traditional music as a template. In West Virginia, traditional music is still living music, and Pete's songs are a part of this living tradition, and he's been able to parlay that talent into his debut collection of short stories, Mountain Tales and River Stories. So, Pete, we want to welcome you to Chapters. It's nice to see you, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, tell me a little bit before we get into some of your stories in your collection, a little bit about how being a songwriter and being a musician, how that helps you with the writing process and how that helps you develop stories.
Well, I always liked songwriters, and I liked old ballads. And that's one thing you get out of that is a story. And you get a complete story. You get a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a plot, as it were. So as I eventually learned traditional music and traditional ballads and folk songs, they became a template, and then I started to write my own songs. I met songwriters who were writing songs that I thought were old, but they weren't old. So I started to write my own music, and that's nothing but a story. You're telling a story, right? So songwriting is telling a story in a very short, concise manner, but you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like any story. So I guess it was just sort of natural to eventually develop that into writing short stories as well.
And at what point did you decide that you wanted to put this collection of stories together? Was this something that you started writing just individual short stories and realized that you had a collection, or did you know early on that you were going to write a set of stories to be put together for a collection?
Well, there's 19 stories in this collection, and 2 of them I had written years ago. I wrote one maybe 15 years ago, I just had an idea and wrote a story. Just kept it. And then about 10 years ago, I wrote another story, and I had it. So I had 2 stories written, but I didn't plan on really doing anything with them. But even when I was young, I used to think in terms of writing stories because I'd read a lot, and I like storytelling. So I had a song that I wrote called Wolf Trap Sam, which I recorded a while back. But it's a fictional story about the last wolf killed in West Virginia, which was in the 1890s in Webster County. And the fictional character I created, whose name is Wolf Trap Sam in the song, I liked the story in the song, so I decided I'd try to develop that into the idea from the song into a longer story. And I know Max Samples. I don't know, you know Max Samples? Mm-hmm. Okay. I see him at music festivals, and he had written some books I liked. And I told him I had an idea for a story, but I didn't know if I'd have time to write it. And he said, nope, you better just take time to do it. So I sat down and I wrote that story. And between August and December of 2015, I wrote 15 stories. And every time I'd write one, I'd send it to Kirk Judd, and maybe Max Samples, and they'd give me a little feedback. And finally, one day, Kirk just said, don't send me anymore. This is a collection, and we should try to publish it. So,
man, fantastic. What were some of the challenges that you had in writing those stories? Because you mentioned that relatively within a short time span you were able to generate 15 stories. Were there any challenges along the way or any struggles that you had in putting those together?
It was just nothing but fun. I just had a really good time. Once I got one written, I wrote another, and I wrote another, and it's just like when I used to write a lot of songs. I don't write as many songs now. I write these stories, and I used to think in terms of songs. I would see something happen, and I'd think, that's going to be a song, and I'd write a song about it. Now I think of something, and I think I'm going to write a story about that. And so from August to December of 2015, I wrote 15 stories, and maybe a couple more after that. And then I basically didn't write one story for almost a year. And then last December, I started again, and I've got about 25 more since last December.
Wow.
So I've been It's weird. It's just, but it's nothing but fun. It's just been really a good escapism and a lot of fun.
That's great.
And
So what is your process like when you write a short story? Do you handwrite them and type them as you go? Do you do them all in one day? Do you break your days up? And how do you do that?
the first story that's in this book, the Wolf of Evenings, which was the wolf trap story, I wrote that out longhand, most of it, almost all of it. And I sat on it for a while, and then I typed it. And after that, I didn't go back to writing longhand, except when I was camping. Sometimes I go camping, and I'll get an idea, and I'll write 10 or 20 pages longhand and go home and type it up. Generally, most of them come right out of my head, right there. Although some of them I do make an outline ahead of time, depending.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned that you worked with Kurt Jug and Max Samples to get some feedback. What were some of the things they said about your drafts, and what were some common editing comments that you got from them about ways to make your stories better?
Max comments were usually more like, good story, get it published, like it. Kirk, now, he would usually send me the story back with suggestions for maybe some grammatical things, or he would ask me questions. What's this mean? You should clarify this. This needs to be developed a little more. And that was, so he was very helpful, because I'd never really had, anything like that. Now, one other person that did help me was Lee Maynard. And I had met Lee Maynard a few times at music festivals and things, and once at West Virginia Writers, where I was playing music. And I live in Charleston, and one day I had just printed a manuscript of The Wolf of Evenings, the first draft, and I was taking it home to read it. And I saw Lee at the Kroger's in Charleston. He was riding his motorcycle across the country from New Mexico. And he remembered who I was, and I asked him if I could give him a copy of that, and he did. And about 5 weeks later, he emailed me and gave me some good feedback. So that was neat.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great to have Lee Maynard give you any kind of feedback
That's right.
or anything, so that's great. I want to ask you about a couple of stories that really caught my attention in your collection. One is the story Woodsmoke.
Yes,
And
yes.
I love that story because I think it's just so well written and so interesting, but I love it because fall is my favorite
Right.
season, and I felt like I was there. And you write one line that I really like: the quiet, cool fall days when the bright yellows, oranges, reds, and browns all blended together to form a crazy quilt of the surrounding hills were his favorite days of the year. I just felt like I was there. I felt like I was ready and experiencing that West Virginia fall.
Good.
So tell us a little bit about that story and that his favorite days of the year. Who are we talking about in that particular
Well,
story?
it's a fictional person, but it's a little autobiographical maybe, because I live in Charleston. I grew up in the Chemical Valley, and I love the fall, and I like going camping in the fall, and I've always liked that. And I'm trying to write about a person who is maybe a little bit no longer in the mainstream of our society. Technology has sort of passed this guy by a little bit. He still has a flip phone. His no one really wants to go camping with him because they want electric or they want a flush toilet, and he has a little cabin or shack he goes to in the mountains, and he associates the fall and the cool air and the wood smoke with something that he likes. And the jacket that he has, he never washes, and it smells like the wood smoke. And when he goes there, he's still an important person. He's still relevant. But when he's back home, he's sort of just on the sidelines, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I really think that's interesting. I have a friend of mine who's not really a writer, but he says, my idea of camping is the Hilton. So he would be one of those people that would be against your character that says, well, my idea of camping, if I don't have running water and plumbing and toilets and all that, that I'm not interested. But there's something special, I think, about that experience that you write about getting away.
It's also Appalachian experience too, because it's sort of, there's a lot of people, I think, that are like that, and they're maybe not necessarily written about. And I think that that's important, maybe, to tell their story a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. It was a great story. Another one I really liked was The Wreck of the Karen Lee.
Ah, yes.
And when I saw that, the title is great. And when I saw Karen Lee, I asked myself, I bet this is going to be about a boat, because that just sounds like a boat's name, and it was. and it recalls the career of a tugboat captain named Captain Billy, or
Right.
Captain Billy, and his adventure hunting sort of this giant carp in the murky waters of the Kanawha River. Tell us a little bit about that story.
That is a semi-true story. The Karen Lee was a real boat that sank in the Kanawha. And I think it sank in 2007, if I remember. This was the second story I wrote in this collection.
Oh, okay, very good.
And this was one I wrote like 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I saw the headlines, and I read the story, and it had a hole in the side of the hull, and it sank outside Haddad Riverfront Park while they were building it. They were doing some revisions, and there was a barge with a crane. And I just took that idea one night, and I actually had been up in Jackson's Mill in Lewis County, I believe, playing music at Stonewall Jackson Jubilee. And I was driving home, and I almost wrote that whole story in my head driving home. And I couldn't wait to get home and get in front of a computer and start typing it. But I took that little snippet of truth, and then Captain Billy was named after a banjo tune that's called Captain Billy. It's actually called Prince William, but a friend of mine changed it to Captain Billy, and I said, I'm going to name the guy Captain Billy. And
That's great.
I took the actual barge and the crane that was at Haddad Riverfront Park at that time and used it in the story. So.
Oh, very nice. That I think that's great. And you answered my next question was that based on a real? But tell us a little bit about this giant carp.
Okay.
And why is Captain Billy so obsessed about going back there and making sure he gets this big fish?
Well, the Captain Billy story actually goes back a little further. When I was years ago, I worked at South Charleston High School, and we worked with our students built a outrigger canoe one year for the Anything That Floats race in the Kanawha River, the regatta.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we didn't know is you had to enter there had to be a theatrical component to it, a skit. And they told me at 10 o'clock the night before they were going to launch the boat, you're doing the skit. Well, I couldn't think, so I was driving home and I thought of Captain Ahab, where they cross the lances, and he touches the apex, and they all drink the rum. And they pour the rum on it. So I thought I'll name him Captain Billy, and I put something across my eye, and I put on an old pea coat the next day, and I got a big tin cup full of red pop, and that was going to be carp blood. And I had everybody cross their oars, and I poured the blood of the great white carp on there. And I made that up. Just made it up,
Which I bet the kids loved.
But then that was in the back of my mind, and I came up with this.
Oh, okay.
So it's all just a bunch of BS I put together.
I think that's great to be able to work some of that together. You mentioned a little bit about this at the beginning about the last time that a wolf was actually killed in West Virginia, Webster County, 1897. That makes its way into one of your stories in this collection, A Wolf of Evenings, and we're following the life of a trapper with the last name of Hamrick and a nickname of Wolf Trap. Tell us a little bit about him and what goes on in that story.
Okay. Years ago, I wrote a song called Wolf Trap Sam about a man who supposedly, I made him the man who kills the last wolf in West Virginia. Now, the last wolf in West Virginia was supposedly killed around 1897 in Webster County. And I have all the ghosts of all these wolves attack him and all this. Well, I wanted to develop that into a story, so I did, and I changed his name to Nige in the story, but Hamrick is a very common name in Webster County, as is McClung, which is in there. And I also wanted it to be a story that's not only about the last wolf killed, a fictional treatment of it, but I wanted it to involve songs on ballads. So first of all, the whole plot of the story is from a song that I wrote. One of the characters in the story is Preacher Black, who is based on Billy Ed Wheeler's song Reverend Mr. Black, which I got his permission to do that. Also, it has Cherry River Line in it, which is an old folk song from the lumber camps, and Pretty Polly, which is a murder ballad. And I've got those running through that story. And once I started writing it, I just had a ball doing it. And I teach history, and I teach Appalachian cultures, so all the historical stuff in it was already in my head, and I just dovetailed Nige Hamrick, the fictional character, in with some real history, and And The Wolf of Evenings is a quote from, I think, the book of Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Very, very good. And that's one of the things I love about this entire collection is we get a sense of place and history woven in. And I like that, we hear about things like Magic Island. You've touched about that. You talk about and you write about dredging the Kanawha River for barge traffic, which was something that a lot of folks forget about that was done at one time. Splash Beach was on the south side of the Kanawha at one time.
Right.
All these great memories of Charleston, of Appalachia, of the Kanawha Valley. I love that you incorporate that. And I also like the fact that we have all kinds of characters that are living and telling these stories. We've got everybody from Nige and everybody from Captain Billy all the way to the Mothman to young fishermen to roller derby girls.
Yes.
I mean, every single kind of subsect of Appalachia is represented here. Is that
George the Syrian?
George the Syrian, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Did you set out to do that, to have that diversity, or did those characters just work their way in?
No, it just, I grew up in Charleston. I grew up fishing on the Kanawha River. And I grew up spending a lot of time in the mountains in Summers County, Pocahontas County, along Route 33, places like that. In fact, this is Huntington. I lost here. I'm more familiar with the other part. And I've been to Point Pleasant a bit, and southern West Virginia. I recorded about 5 CDs of music in Logan, and I used to go down there a lot. So, no, it's just you think of these stories, and of course, you draw on experiences you've had, and you develop them, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. And they're great stories because they have those common themes, but they're also different in their own way, which I think is great. And I want to ask you about how the book is arranged. There's 3 sections: Mountain Tales, River Stories, and the third section is Between Mountain and River. So, is this something that happened after you started to put the collection together, or did you set out and say, I'm going to write tales about mountains, tales about rivers, tales about between the mountain and river?
That happened later in the editing process, because when I wrote the stories, I didn't always know where they were going to go, and some of them are a little supernatural. The Banshee of Deadfall Ridge and the one about Nige Hamrick, and then the Mothman and several. They have a supernatural element. And some of them are almost like essays, like the Woodsmoke's almost kind of like an essay, sort of, and the Roller Girls at the Empty Glass. And then there's the fishing stories and the river stories, and we had to sort of we were thinking, how are we going to title this? Because we couldn't figure out how to title it either, because they don't all fall into one category.
Right.
But they are all about West Virginia, except one's in Kentucky. And we figured out they're either in the mountains, eastern mountains, or they're kind of in Charleston along the river. So we figured Mountain Tales and River Stories.
I want to ask you, too, about your cover, Pete, because one of the first things we see, and we'll certainly put a picture of the cover up on the screen for our audience to see, but we see a gentleman sitting here, sort of kind of a cowboyish looking person, kind of a weathered face, the big wide brim hat, and he's sort of sitting in the rocking chair with the pistol kind of over his arm, and you can see the barrel of the gun hanging over the edge of the rocking chair. Who is that person, and why did you decide to put him on the front cover?
Well, that's my dad. That's my dad, Bob Kosky. And this photograph, even though it looks from maybe 1880, it was actually taken last July by a very good, talented photographer named Lisa Elmaleh. And I met her several years ago, and she lives in Paw Paw, West Virginia, but she travels around the state and the Appalachian region with a old tintype camera that does glass plate negatives and tintypes. And she's been documenting old-time musicians. And she took a photograph of me that was in Golden Seal a few years ago. And I'd been trying for a couple years to get her to come down to this cabin we camp at in Summers County and take a photograph. Just wanted her to take a picture of my dad, an old-time looking picture. And she came down last July, and it was evening, about 5:30. The light was going. And that's a 40-second exposure, that photograph. Well, we hadn't intended to use that for the cover of the book. That was just wanted a picture. And it was done on a piece of aluminum. They don't use tin, they use aluminum now. And about 3 weeks later, I was trying to think of a cover for this collection, and I said, that's perfect. And I called her, and she said we could use it.
Great.
So it's my dad, and that's a place where some of the stories actually were written down there. So that's kind of cool.
It is. So what did your dad think when you told him his picture was going to be on the cover of your book?
I guess he liked it. It's pretty cool. It's kind of neat. It makes it even a little more personal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting about history and photography. A lot of people wonder why, do people pictures in the Civil War, post-Civil War, early 1900s, always looks so, nobody smiles, nobody grins, and that's because it took so long to have your picture taken. You would sit there sometimes
That's
for
true.
an hour or two, and if you're doing it in the summertime and it's 100 degrees and you're sitting there waiting for that thing to click so that you can picture, nobody's happy. Everybody's miserable sitting
And
there.
my dad's a very patient person, and he's very stoic, so it was perfect for him. He could sit there for 40 seconds. It was easy.
Didn't bother him,
No.
absolutely. Now, I know Mountain State Press is the publisher of this collection, and we've had Kat Pleska on the program and several other authors that have published through Mountain State Press on the program. How did you connect with her and connect with them in terms of getting this book published?
Okay. Partly through Kirk Judd, who I've known for 20 years, and they know each other through West Virginia writers. Also, several years ago, I got hired by Culture and History to do a songwriting workshop at the Cultural Center for some event, and the West Virginia writers were there, and Kat Pleska approached me about doing entertainment at the writers' conference. So that's where I met her. So I went to the writers' conference twice and played music there, just sang at night. Well, when Kirk suggested I get this published, he gave me a list of publishers that I should try out, and I contacted some, and one told me they weren't taking any new books and that sort of thing. And then he suggested that I contact Kat Pleska, and I just called her, or I may have emailed her, I don't remember, but she called me. I remember she called me back. I think I must have emailed her. She said, send me 3 stories, and I can't guarantee anything. And I sent her Wolf of Evenings, Wood Smoke, and the Raised Branch Trout Robbery. And she said, I want the rest of them. And I sent her those, and she said, I want to publish it. So that was nice.
That was great, yeah.
And I was very fortunate to get to meet her and work with her. She's very professional, and she's really sharp.
Yeah, she is. She's very good. So, what are you working on now?
I have a whole lot more stories, enough for another book. Although, of course, if I ever get one published, it'll be several years down the road. But by that time, I should really have a good collection. And I've got some more of the same, some more supernatural tales, some more that are not supernatural, just nice stories, and some that are humorous. But they all take place in West Virginia. And one of the things that this sort of morphed into, I love short story collections. I like Shirley Jackson, I like Richard Matheson, and I like Elmore Leonard.
Absolutely.
I like John Steinbeck, and I like Washington Irving, and people like that. And Steinbeck and Irving especially, they always have when you read Steinbeck, it's Central Valley, California. When you read Irving, it's Hudson Valley. Well, I wanted to have a collection where people think, well, if they read this guy, it's going to be West Virginia somewhere. And I think people in West Virginia and Appalachia should have stories to read that are about their region, because you can't find that unless you specialize in looking for it, because most stories are about somewhere else in the country.
Yeah.
And other than we've got Davis Grubb, and we've got Breeze Pancake and Pickney Benedict, and we've got Glenn Taylor, and I just want to be somewhere, where people can say, if I want to read about West Virginia, I'll read some of his stories.
I think that's a great goal to have. So you mentioned that you teach at South Charleston High School. Did your students know that you write short stories? Did they know about this book? And if not, what do you think they're going to say in the fall or spring or whenever you see them again that you've published a book? What do you think
Well,
the reaction will
they
be?
knew that I had written songs, and actually it's probably been 10 years since they really knew I wrote a lot of songs, because I hadn't made a CD in a while. But the current group, the book came out just before school let out, so I told them about it. But I didn't tell them about it till the last minute. And, I don't know. They didn't. Most of them, they live in an earbud world. What do they care?
Yeah.
They don't really care.
And they don't want to read books?
And yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
it doesn't really matter to me that much. But I'll sell them a book if they want to buy one.
Very good. So, Pete, in our final moments, if someone wants to get in contact with you to talk to you directly about your songs, your CDs, or Mountain Tales and River Stories, how can they get in contact with you, first of all? And secondly, where can they get copies of your book? Okay.
They can contact me through, I have a Facebook page. I don't really look at it. My wife does. I'm not an internet guy, but it is on there. They can leave a message. Also, the books are available through a number of places at this point. We do have a distributor who's picked it up, but I don't know where he's put it yet, but if you get on the internet on mountainstatepress.org, you can order it. You can get it at Spring Hill Rod and Gun in Spring Hill, West Virginia, near South Charleston. Prickett's Fort State Park has them. The store at Fort Randolph has them. They're also available on Amazon Prime and the West Virginia Book Company online.
Very good. So just about several places there for where.
And here, right?
And here at Empire Books.
Empire Books in Huntington, and we're working on getting it in other places, and it's going very well.
Good. Good. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Pete Kosky today here on Chapters. The title of his debut collection of short stories, Mountain Tales and River Stories, is out, published by Mountain State Press. It's a wonderful collection of short stories, very much about culture and Appalachia and the people that do and have inhabited the area, and folks that are familiar with Charleston, the Kanawha Valley, and really everything about Appalachia that ties West Virginia with that region and that culture will really appreciate it. So, Pete, it's a great collection of short stories. Congratulations, and thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for
Chapters.
having me. I appreciate it.
We also want to take a moment to say thanks to Chris Dargish and the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our on-site support and assistance today. We encourage you to come down and get a copy of Pete Kosky's book right here at Empire Books and News. And we also remind you that many of the other author, editor, and publishers you've seen featured here on Chapters have their works for sale at Empire Books and News. So whatever reading taste you may have, Empire Books and News can get that satisfied for you right here at Pullman Square in downtown Huntington, so we encourage you to stop by. If you'd like to interact with the program, and if you've got a question, comment, or suggestion about this program or any Chapters program that you've seen on Armstrong Television, we have a way for you to reach out to us through social media and several social media platforms. The easiest way and the first way to get in touch with us is at the email address that you see right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We do ask that you leave your name and the location in which you're writing from when you send us that correspondence. We do read those comments and we do take that feedback into consideration, so please keep those emails coming. If you like to watch programming on YouTube, we have a Chapters tab available to you through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube, and that address is right here at the bottom of the screen. Once you go to that location, just look for that Chapters tab, and from there we've got all of our 100-plus author, editor, and publisher interviews archived for you there as well. And if you're a Facebook user, we also have a Chapters page on Facebook. All you need to do is go to facebook.com. In the search field, type in Chapters TV Show, and there we have our more recent episodes archived for you there. And you can interact with viewers of the program, share those on your own Facebook page, and use all the other Facebook features to comment and interact with the episodes that you're watching. So if you like Facebook, if you like YouTube, if you like email, we've made it possible for you to stay in touch with the program through one of those platforms. We know many of you have done that. We appreciate that so much, so please keep those comments and feedback coming. And that will do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.